Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here at this amazing webinar hosted by the Brooks McCormick Animal Law and Policy Program, as well as the Harvard Animal Law Society. We have a very interesting panel today, and I would like to introduce the speakers. We have Jayasimha Nuggehalli, who is the co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of Global Food Partners, a consulting firm in Singapore that advocates for animal welfare in the food industry. Jayasimha has played a pivotal role in helping Asian companies implement cage-free egg commitments and establish a sustainable ecosystem for cage-free egg production. He also worked as a fellow over here at the Animal Law and Policy Program at Harvard Law School. He contributed to the development of impact incentives for cage-free eggs. Under Jaya's leadership, model farms and training centers have been established in Indonesia and China, with plans to expand these projects to India in the future. Combining advocacy, strategic planning, and stakeholder engagement, Jaya strives to drive higher welfare production systems and operational efficiencies in the industry. So we welcome you, Jaya. Thank you for being here. And I would now like to introduce Josh Balk, who is the co-founder and CEO of the Accountability Board, an organization that utilizes shareholder engagement to advance animal welfare and other issues with the world's largest corporations like McDonald's, Kroger, Walmart, Burger King, and more than 100 more. Previously, he was vice president of farm animal protection at the Humane Society of the United States, where he led a passage of a dozen state laws banning cages for hens who lay eggs, pigs, field calves, including the historic California Prop 12, the strongest law in the world for farm animals. He also led corporate negotiations with the largest food companies to enact animal welfare. Balk is also a co-founder of Eat Just, the maker of Just Egg, and the first company to ever sell cultivated meat in the world. Prior to his work at the HSUS and co-founding Eat Just, he worked at Animal Outlook, where he did undercover investigations at chicken slaughterhouses and factory farms. So thank you so much for being here, Josh. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I'm going to start with a very basic question to both of you, and you can decide who answers first. Tell us about what your organizations do. Jaya, do you want to start?
I'll actually get Josh go because I
Okay.
think will be a natural progression from the work that he does.
Okay,
That
Josh.
sounds great, Jaya. Absolutely. At the Accountability Board, we're investors in every major publicly traded food company and other companies throughout the United States, Canada, Australia, UK, France, and increasingly other countries around the world. And as shareholders within these companies, we can use our shareholder prowess to move them along the very issues they have often pledged to shareholders that they will address, issues that not only are important socially, like as we're talking about today, the treatment of animals, but also issues that present risks to shareholders if the companies don't address them. And when shareholders address issues, we can do it from an approach that I think is pretty unique. We are part owners of the company. When we move forward with things such as shareholder proposals, these are proposals that aren't just sent to executives at companies. They get put on a proxy, which every investor gets, and investors can vote on it. And so just as people get a proxy in the mail, if you're an investor in a company, you vote on who's the board of directors, you vote on in compensation for executives, we could put things on the proxy as well for investors to vote on. And oftentimes it comes back to very issues that I know concern everybody who is in attendance today, including the treatment of animals. So we've been able to get some of the biggest advancements, some of the most wide-ranging, impactful corporate advancements for animals that has ever occurred through this strategy, and happy to talk more about it throughout today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Nirva. Really excited to be here. So at Global Food Partners, our work kind of starts when companies make the commitments. So we've known that the many global companies, as well as few Asian companies who made commitments to go cage-free, but a lot of time companies need a ton of support to implement these commitments in Asia. We have primarily focused in Asia. I'm based out of Singapore. We work in about 8-9 countries in this region, mostly Southeast Asia, China, and India. And what we realized is that for companies to actually implement cage-free, there isn't an ecosystem at all. So in many parts of the world where cage-free ecosystem is evolved, like say the US or Europe, you have the same supplier who's supplying cage-free eggs as well as caged eggs. You want to do a transition. There's going to be an increased cost, but it's a matter of picking up a phone, at least, and like making that particular order. So you could like talk to your supplier, let's say Cargill or someone like that. However, in this part of the world, we realize that cage-free is such an emerging issue. There really isn't a demand or a supply of cage-free eggs within the retail environment. And so what we do is work on both ends of the supply chain. That is working with the farmers for them to transition to cage-free egg production, providing them technical support. And that's where our model farms and the technical work that we do. We also help develop roadmaps for companies to implement. And in that roadmap, we figure out as to in which markets companies can buy physical cage-free eggs, in which market they can buy impact incentives, a program that I proudly worked on while I was a fellow at the Animal Law and Policy program, where companies can buy impact incentives, which is kind of an offset credit to start the whole cage-free transition in emerging markets. So that's really top-level work that Global Food Partners does.
That's amazing. Okay. The next question. What animal issues do you focus on and why? So specifically within this world that you live in of farm animal welfare, what are the specific issues that your organization focuses on?
You know, at this point, for animals, the area of focus mostly has to do with the confinement of egg-laying hens in cages and of mother pigs in gestation crates. So just to take a step back, I think a lot of folks know about this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. Most egg-laying hens around the world are confined in small cages about the size of your home microwave. They're confined so tightly they can't even spread their wings. Imagine 6 to 8 birds in a cage. They have to eat, sleep, defecate, lay eggs in the same small spot every single day for their entire life. You know, most mother pigs within the pork industry on a global scale, during their pregnancy are confined in what are called gestation crates so narrow, these pigs never could ever turn around. You know, these are highly inquisitive, intelligent social animals prevented from even turning around. And so we focus on these issues for several reasons. One, for egg-laying hens, you know, in the United States, there's 320 million of them. Globally, there's billions of them. In China alone, there's something like 1.3 billion of them. For mother pigs, there's millions of them as well. So we can improve the lives of many animals, and those animals, the amount of intensity they have, their suffering is so vast. So when we get them out of cages, it massively reduces their suffering. So it's a lot of animals and a lot of suffering that's reduced. And there are alternatives. Cage-free, hey, cage-free isn't perfect. It's not utopia, but it's much better than being confined in a cage so small the bird can't even extend her wings. In cage-free settings, they're able to run around, they're able to perch, scratch, dust bathe, lay eggs in a nesting area. Critical behavioral needs they can do in a cage-free environment that they cannot do in a cage environment. Mother pigs, instead of being confined in a tiny cage, they're moved to group setting where at least they're able to walk around in a pen, interact with each other, and lay down. Now, that might not sound like much, but it's a lot better than being unable to turn around ever. So there are tremendous steps forward by getting rid of these cages and crates. And when we're working with these companies and pushing these companies to move forward, what we have found is that not only are these issues socially important because consumers do care about the freedom of animals, these issues present a financial risk for companies. And here's why. Analyst after analyst, including the World Bank to Citigroup to the big investment firms, have found that when food companies are enthralled within a cruelty to animals controversy, it hurts the company financially. And so what we shine a light on is that, yes, these issues matter in society a lot. And yes, there's a lot of ethical concerns. But for shareholders, let's also take a look at how it's a financial risk for your share value if companies aren't moving away from these very abusive practices. And that's how we bring it all in together. And that's why those issues happen to be particularly strong. It's very clear about how much cruelty is very easy for anyone to understand. And by the way, there's laws and regulations throughout the world related to this topic. So companies should be ahead of these laws rather than being pushed into complying with these laws, which again is a financial risk for the company be behind any type of legal efforts to change these practices. That's why I focus on those two. We're also focusing on the treatment of broiler chickens in the meat industry, and we'll eventually get to other issues that are certainly very critical in terms of ethics, but also bring risk to companies as well.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, same. We almost exclusively focus on egg-laying hens as an issue. And again, just to kind of add on to the same reasons that Josh spoke about animal welfare, but also if the sum total of all the countries that we operate in makes the most of the world's egg-laying hens, like if you were to just add India, China, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and these are all growing economies. The second reason why we do focus on corporate work is a lot of the countries that we work in, there isn't a lot of scope for public policy work to be done at all. And that could be primarily because lack of, let's say, ballot measure or initiatives which you can do, or very opaque decision-making even within the regulators. And similarly, even with companies, what we've seen is a lot of the times the line between state-owned, private-owned is pretty blurred, and they're not necessarily listed. If they're listed, then still the family owns a vast majority. So it just the lay of the land when it comes to business is a little bit different again, Asia is not a monolith, but each of these countries are really different in that way. So, for example, let's say like a country like China, where you couldn't actually do any activism at all. India, where it's becoming more and more hard. So we've kind of taken an approach that a non-adversarial collaborative approach for the companies to meet their cage-free commitments and fulfill their policies. And the reason why we chose cage-free for now till at least in 2025, 2027 is a lot of Asian companies are looking at these global commitments and figuring out, will they actually come to fruit? As in, will the companies actually put where the money is, where their commitments are? And currently, it seems that the signaling effect is that companies have made the commitments, but they don't actually plan to implement it in countries like India or China or Malaysia. As in not all companies, but most companies. Hence, we focus to ensure that the signaling is right, that cage-free can be done. And what we are hoping is with the international companies meeting their cage-free commitments, that will kind of have a trickle-down effect to Asian companies who are very keenly looking at what these global companies actually do in this region.
Great. So now we know who you are, we know what you're focusing on, but we'd like to know next, what are some of the big successes that you've experienced in your respective organizations?
With McDonald's, we all know McDonald's. It's a global icon of the food industry, maybe the most famous food company in the world. It wasn't that long ago when they were defending their use of eggs from caged chickens and had no plans to shift over to cage-free at all. And so after numerous years of doing investor type of outreach and campaigning, the company eventually committed years ago to start switching to cage-free eggs in the United States. They said that it would take about 10 years. This was in 2015. Since then, the company had some issues in terms of following through with the egg issue or the pork issue. And so we had to use pretty strong shareholder actions to move the company to fulfill the very commitments that it's made. And to build off of what Jayasimha said is that most food companies, they have good policies on their website. They've promised good things. However, very few of them have actually followed through yet, at least not to completion. And McDonald's was one of them. And so because of these type of shareholder work that we did, not only did McDonald's in the United States get to 100% cage-free in all of its eggs, they did it 2 years earlier than they said. Now, right now, this moment, every single egg used and sold at McDonald's is cage-free. And do you know how many eggs they use? 2 billion annually in the United States. And if one thinks that each egg-laying hen lays about an egg a day, we're talking about 2 billion fewer days of suffering that a chicken will have, that chickens have within a cage because of that one corporate advancement. 2 billion fewer days of suffering. That's impact. That's impact. And you know what? McDonald's was right to do it because there's about a dozen state laws that have to do with the confinement of farm animals. More states are looking to do so. Their competitors are moving on the issue. And so not only is it better for egg-laying hens, but it's also better for shareholder value that the company is ahead of the curve, or at least staying slightly above the curve compared to being behind on an issue this severe. And in terms of all of us who tuned in here care about the treatment of animals, it's hard to think of an advancement that has caused more reduction of suffering than this McDonald's advancement has. You know, when we talk about mother pigs, we've also got recently Yum Brands to make a commitment to stop using pork from operations to confine pigs perpetually in gestation crates. Yum Brands, as you all may know, they own KFC, they own Pizza Hut. So when they make a commitment to move away from sourcing, you know, their bacon, you know, and their sausage and other products that they source from pig operations, that's a massive advancement. And Yum Brands, you know, they aren't known to be the bastions of animal welfare sympathies. Yet because of working with them via the shareholder path, we were able to achieve this advancement. And so what the company committed to do is not only eliminate pork from operations that confine pigs in those gestation crates perpetually, but also set benchmarks by the end of this year of where they're going to be each year on their path to get to 100% away from gestation crates. And that matters because we can ensure as shareholders that the company's moving forward. And we don't have to wait till the end date. Like, hey, did they ever do it? And if a company doesn't do it, like, shoot, I wish we would have known that over the last several years. No, when companies put benchmarks forward, like Yum Brands has, we can make sure that they're taking positive steps forward. And what a signal also to the pork industry. In the United States, the pork industry is working very hard to try to slow this progress down. They're pushing something in Congress called the EATS Act that would wipe out farm animal laws across the country. They are so out of touch with ordinary American sentiment about how animals ought to be treated, but them being out of touch doesn't stop them from trying. And for them to see that yet another company like Yum Brands has now taken a stance against this normal type of abuse that goes on within the pork industry is a strong signal to them that the future is without crates. And Nirva, the last thing I would say, just as an example, and we can go into dozens and dozens of advancements we've had over the last several months, but we beat Jack in the Box at their own shareholder meeting on a shareholder proposal that went to a vote, and this was about climate change. So we filed a proposal, shareholder proposal about climate change, as we talked about. That goes to a vote for all investors to vote on. We make a case on why they should vote on it. In this case, it had to do with Jack in the Box being transparent about its greenhouse gas emissions and having plans to reduce them. We made our case to the big investment firms, the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards of the world, the big investment firms with billions of dollars invested. Guess what? Jack in the Box made their case to oppose us. And at their shareholder meeting, they had to announce that it was the accountability board, not themselves, that won this vote. And it's so significant that less than 3% of shareholder proposals ever win. So when you do, it is a holy moly type of event that happens with a company. Not only does it drive them to actually move on an issue, it also puts them on notice to take other issues more seriously, or they're going to be further put on notice by shareholders that they're simply out of touch, not just with consumers, as we talked about with animal welfare, but also with investor sentiment, that they have to start addressing this issue.
It's amazing.
Amazing, Josh. Yeah, I think our problem is a teeny bit different in the sense we are where maybe the US was 20 years ago. So when we really look at all the positive things that Josh spoke about that's happening in the US or maybe other groups that they speak in the Europe, the big question that we need to answer is, what's so different about the US where the change is happening today, and what can we learn from there? And broadly, there are a few lines that come up. One is these state laws saying that, okay, these state laws that are coming in that prohibits animals being in cages, the state laws that have come in which says you can't even sell these products anymore. And we kind of realized that, well, that might not necessarily happen now in the region that we operate. Then we can realize that maybe within the industry where we have a lot more control, farmers have an ecosystem if they want to transition to cage-free. So, sourcing a cage-free pullet or a feed or equipment manufacturing, all of that is not that hard because this ecosystem has existed. However, my colleague Jay and I were in the Philippines last week, and it's almost impossible for a cage-free farmer to source cage-free pullets in the entire country. So pullets, for the audience who might not know, egg-laying hen starts off as a day-old chick. They need to be reared in a particular farm when they start laying eggs, and they're called as pullets. And at that point of time, they're moved into a laying farm, and then they start laying eggs. And pullet sourcing becomes a really, really important element within establishing of a cage-free farm. And in the entire country of Philippines, there isn't a genetic company that actually sells a cage-free genetic. And so the problem that we are trying to solve is, can we create an ecosystem for the transition to happen in that region? And I think our success story really in the 5 years of our existence is in a lot of these countries where we operate now, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. People didn't even know what cage-free is. And when we spoke about cage-free, they were like, well, are you asking us to go back to a traditional backyard system that our grandparents raised birds in? And to kind of say, no, it can be done in Asia. It can be done at the tropics. It doesn't have to be really fancy. You can actually make money. And I think the fact that we've been able to establish this through our model farms, the fact that we've created an ecosystem in countries that we operate. So if a farmer wants to transition, they have a solution. So when a farmer transitions from cage to cage-free, right, they move from being an egg farmer to a hen farmer. Their entire attitude needs to change. And what really needs to change is also the stockspersonship on farm. And a lot of the agri-universities in this part of the world don't teach that. And when a farmer sets up a cage-free farm, even if they do something wrong and there's like floor eggs, feather pecking, mortality, whatever that could possibly go wrong in a cage-free facility, they'll always blame the system. They'll never take the blame on themselves. If they set up a cage farm, and if something were to go bad, they'll blame themselves, say that, oh, well, we probably did something wrong. And when something goes wrong on a cage-free farm, then it becomes a folklore. And people are like, oh my God, do you know that person set up a cage-free farm? And these birds just started to peck each other and kill them because there was an extreme feather pecking, not realizing that the feather pecking actually took place because of a poorly managed farm. So broadly, I think the big success for us has been to demonstrate to farmers that cage-free can be done within the constraints of what Asia brings. And also on the corporates, as in we've developed roadmaps for the world's largest Chinese manufacturers to go from almost single digit to 95% cage-free by their commitment. We work with the largest food service providers. We work with hospitality. And we're bringing together these coalitions in different parts of the country, different parts of Asia, many times multiple coalitions in the same country. We are also bringing together pre-competitive collaborations so that companies, buyers, and producers are able to sell. So I guess if there's one thing that's been a big tick mark for us is, can we just create these conducive ecosystems for farmers to transition along with the market mechanisms so that they're able to make money out of this transition? And that's been a success.
That's great. Wow. It's ambitious, but you'll do it. Okay. The next question I have is, and you've probably answered a few of these, you've probably answered this question in your conversations. Tell us about what has surprised you when you've been working with companies. What are some of the surprises and, realities that you didn't expect to happen when you're having maybe conversations with shareholders or companies or getting that contract or implementing the ecosystem? Yeah.
For sure. I've been doing this like Jayasimha for quite some time, and so I've been working with companies for several decades. At first when I started working with companies, I would just make just the ethical argument about, hey, you may not know this, but this is where you get your eggs from. Look at this video about how these hens are treated. Look at this video about how these mother pigs are treated. Look at this video about chickens in the meat industry, how much they suffer. Let's work together on a plan to move away from this. And we can do it within your business model. Let's take some steps forward. We know it can't happen overnight, but at least we can move forward. Early on, and if I would talk to myself 20 years ago, Josh version, I would say, listen, I appreciate, looking to the best of folks and hoping for the best while making those arguments. Unfortunately, companies don't respond to that. That is what I learned. What I learned is that, at least in the work that I've done with companies, is that I believe, for the most part, not all, by the way, this is for the most part, companies want to do as little as possible on pretty much any issue, by the way, friends. We're not just talking about animal issues. Most other issues that we probably all care about, they want to do as little as possible. And their preference is to do nothing on the issue. I believe that most people who work at companies are probably good people at heart. I believe they're probably a good husband or wife or dad or mom, good neighbor. I believe that to be true. I also believe that they often leave their morals at home, and when they go to work, the incentives at companies have nothing to do with making the world better in any way, or more importantly for the company, to take steps for the company to make things less bad in terms of the things they are directly responsible for. And there's such a different look on what an incentive is when someone goes into a corporate headquarters than when they're at home. And so what I would say is that if we want to make a difference on a global scale, and I agree with Jayasimha with everything he said about how, yes, there might be places in the world where laws can get passed, and he and I both support that, and we hope those further laws get passed. But at the end of the day, if we want to help animals on a global scale to hit parts of the world that are likely not going to be touched by any laws for animals, we have to work with global corporations to, at minimum, follow through with the very policies they already promised, and hopefully work with them on future policies as well. And I promise everybody here that if we don't work with companies and push companies to follow through on commitments they've made on animal issues or other issues, they're not going to do it. They're simply not going to do it. I can't tell you how many stories I can share related to us filing shareholder proposals and then talking to senior executives, whether the chair of the board or CEO or general counsel, about a commitment they've made, and they have no idea they even made the commitment. And then I have to point on their website where they've had this commitment for years that they're going to do something, and then not even understanding that it existed. And then once they even came to that understanding, they push as hard back as possible to actually follow through. That is the norm, unfortunately. However, the good news is that we now know the reality, and we can push things in a way that's as effective as possible. And at least with what we're doing at the Accountability Board, pushing as shareholders at the highest levels of the company, I have found to be very effective. And the reason being is that, you know what, like, imagine, I worked at the Humane Society of the United States. I was so honored to work there for 18 years, and some of my most cherished memories helping animals was there. I can tell you, I was lucky to get on the phone with a sustainability manager that might be like 1 year out of college, and who maybe has no power whatsoever to make any policy at the company, but at least someone was listening to me. However, that didn't lead to much. Now with the work that we're doing the meetings are almost solely with senior people at the company. We are displacing the power, whereas rather than us begging for a meeting and then we get someone who has very little power at the company, they're approaching us for high-level meetings saying, hey, we got your shareholder proposal. We see it. Can we work on a solution? That is why I think what we've been doing has been so effective in this brief amount of time, only about a year and a half that we've been doing this. That's why I think we can build off of this and have even bigger success in the weeks, months, and years to come.
Thanks, Josh. And I think for us, I think the same reality dawned on us. And just like Josh, I used to work at the Humane Society before Global Food Partners. And we would go into meetings. Half the time, companies don't know that they have a commitment. You literally print it out from their own website and show it to them. And there's always an exclusion. Oh, well, that's only for company owned and operated. This is a franchisee. Oh, well, that's only for shell eggs. This is something else. So there's always, and in fact, I remember meeting with a retailer, and then they were like, well, this is for our house brand eggs, and we actually don't sell any house brand eggs. So our commitments don't actually apply to us. Like there's always something that they find an exclusion to. But I think what's really been surprising for us is how eager farmers are willing to change when they're given the right tools. As in, a typical poultry farmer doesn't wake up in the morning saying that, well, I just need to make the lives of my hens absolutely miserable and let me find an innovative way to do that. It's just that the market dynamics are set in a way where like the lowest bidder gets the tender to supply the eggs. And to Josh's point, till the top bosses say that, from our P&L, we are going to start allocating money for high welfare eggs. The procurement manager is kind of helpless. Their salary is dependent on the fact of keeping the cost low, the procurement cost low, and it just needs to go up the chain. And I think that's really, really important. But I guess what's been good for us is to work with the farmers and pushing through that transition. And when you give the right tool to the farmers, because when you really look at the three parties involved in this conversation, right? One is the consumer, like that's the corporates, and we could kind of discount out the final consumer who are consuming these eggs. We don't know where they stand and how they stand. But anyway, at least on the corporates, if they don't make a cage-free commitment or they don't fulfill, they probably have Josh Walk going at them. Maybe they'll push it by a few years. They'll have some sort of a risk. For animal groups, great. We can go ahead and write more grant applications and say, well, we need to campaign a little bit more. But the person who actually loses their livelihood is the farmer. There's a farmer who has transitioned hoping that somebody's going to buy these cage-free eggs, invests in doing the transition, taking on a loan, setting up a barn and everything. And if companies don't follow through, they really don't have any place to sell eggs, at least in this part of the world. And just to understand that the incentive mechanisms for the farmer is directly linked to their livelihoods and their existence and not going bankrupt. And we just need to facilitate that. And I feel like our impact incentive systems and the way we've modeled this entire trade between the buyers and the sellers is to give the cushioning to the farmer, saying that, well, you can go ahead and do it, and you're not going to go, at least not going to go bankrupt, and because of this transition, and companies will follow through. So yeah, I think the biggest takeaway has been companies will find, I think this Josh said, many reasons not to do something, and that could just be in a writing, it could be anything. Companies will do if it's easy for them, and if you're able to remove the friction. Farmers will do it, and they're eager to do it when there's an ecosystem. And I guess all three becomes really important for us to actually get those birds out of cages.
Right, Jay. Okay. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is, where do you get your intel to know the companies that are out there that are out of compliance, or compliant or non-compliant? So how do you know?
There is a really big advantage for those of us who care when companies are publicly traded, because when they file paperwork to, at least in the United States as an example, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, that has to be legal and accurate. And they get in a lot of serious trouble if they put falsities within SEC documents, if they put falsities to documents to shareholders, to investors. And so companies typically do update investors, in numerous documents about where they're at on commitments they've made on myriad issues. And so they often actually acknowledge that they haven't moved on an issue, but then they make some excuses about why, or they rearrange the wording, or they pretend they have a new commitment when in fact all it's doing is reversing a previous commitment they've made. There's many ways of wording things, but the fact that they are reporting something publicly in documents that have to be accurate for legal reasons, we can keep track of what companies are doing. That's how we understand it. Then when we meet with the companies, we meet such a high level and such a serious way related to our shareholder work, that in order for us to find some common ground with the company, for us to withdraw our proposal, for us to find some compromise, we make sure that we are given all the facts that are needed on our end for us to feel comfortable to allow a company to move forward on a commitment with the trust, at least that we have, that it's going to be fulfilled. So that's how we do it. And again, it's very beneficial that these companies are publicly traded. And from that, we get the information that is due to us as shareholders.
Great. So we have a number of questions that have come in. I just want to maybe list them out, and then you guys can pick which ones you want to answer. So one of the questions is, what change can I make as a lawyer specialized in animal law and environmental law? The other question is there a concern that a cage-free model is less sustainable and impacts to the environmental climate change aspects are greater? And then the third question is specifically to Josh. Josh, if you could snap your fingers and change something in animal welfare after treatment of laying hens and mother pigs, what would it be?
Jayasimha, you want to hop on one of those questions?
Sure, I could do at least from the Asian perspective for 1 and 2. I think there's a ton that can be done with animal law and environmental law. That's also primarily because at least the environmental law is a bit more advanced in many countries than animal law, or probably in many countries where there is no animal law at all, there's at least an Environment Protection Act and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot that can be done, especially in countries which have some sort of common law lineage, and then you're able to like draw tort and holding companies liable. That could be for, let's say, downstream water impact, housefly infestation, everything that you see as an environmental issue. So there could be some. What I haven't really seen is an economic modeling to show that if a factory farm were to internalize all the environmental damage that they do, somehow that the cost of production would increase enough to tilt the balance. I haven't seen the data there, but I do think that, if the idea really is to say, can we just like use environmental law to make these products a bit more expensive so that they're more competitive towards, let's say, all protein and things like that. And I guess Josh spoke a bit on climate change. There is something within the climate change law, but I think in sense of like pure environmental law, which is like water, downstream water pollution, housefly infestation, air, and stuff like that, there definitely is something. Within Asia, this is a huge misconception that people have, that cage-free eggs are less sustainable because the hens end up eating a little bit more feed. And but we've been actually able to document that from a life cycle analysis point of view, just that the birds are so healthy in a cage-free environment and they live longer, and when managed well, the mortality is actually lower. Cage-free can be more sustainable than caged in most cases. And I guess that's a kind of a misconception that's kind of told that because these animals end up eating a little bit more, they're like environmentally not sustainable. So those two.
Yeah, and I can jump in on a couple of those things. One, beyond, I agree with what Jayasimha said, and I'll build off of that. Environmental organizations believe that it's better to have smaller scale farmers and farming than have big industrial complexes. And the reason being is that the environment can handle many family farmers versus one giant complex in one particular place in a geographic region because of the amount of waste that comes out of these operations. In fact, when I led the California Proposition 12 campaign, every single environmental group that took a stand on the Proposition 12 campaign, 100% of them encouraged their supporters to vote yes on Proposition 12 in California. Now, what does that do? It bans the sale and production of eggs, pork, and veal from caged animals. Everyone took the side of voting yes. Zero took agribusiness side to encourage a continuation of confining animals in cages where they can never move even more than just a few inches. Related to snapping my fingers, we can do better, and we should do better about the treatment of chickens in the meat industry. They're selectively bred to grow so big, so fast, or full size after just about 45 days. By the end of their life, their very brief life, they're in constant pain, so much pain that they often can't even walk. They're often sent to slaughter, and I worked in a slaughterhouse. When they're sent to slaughter, their legs are just twisted and mangled because of how big their bodies are. And that's just how their body is bred to become. It doesn't even include how they're confined together in a giant warehouse, totally packed wing to wing. There's no enrichments. When they slaughter, they're shackled and they have their necks slit fully conscious. And so there's just tremendous suffering that goes on for animals that are raised by the billions all across the world. Regarding the concern, I'll answer one more, then pass it back to you, Jayasimha. Related to the concern that efforts for treating animals, the question is there a concern that efforts for treating animals better, is there an implicit condoning of killing animals for food? Are the efforts inconsistent, or are there tensions between the two efforts? What I would say that right now, most companies don't care at all. And so I think we are closer to a world that I think we want to achieve, where animals are treated with mercy and respect, when we start pushing issues and force change that otherwise wouldn't come, and at least even begrudgingly for companies to start caring. I have never seen any social issue ever where society has gone from not caring at all to skipping everything and then caring completely. I don't think that's ever happened. And it's certainly not going to happen with animals. And so in my mind, we need people to care more, not less. And if we can get people to care more, and in particular what I'm doing at companies to care more, again, even begrudgingly care more, that is a good sign that animals indeed do matter in society, to the point where changes have to be made to at least abolish the worst practices that go on.
Jaya, there's a question directly to you. Could you share the life cycle analysis about cage-free not being less sustainable?
Sure. And if there's a way to share my email, I could also take you through the Excel sheet. But on a very top level, when you look at a life of a bird, you get a day-old chick, and from a day-old chick to a stage that it starts laying its first egg, when it reaches its sexual maturity, is the period which is basically called as being rearing and a pullet stage. And then the bird starts laying. Initially, it's laying these tiny eggs, which are of no value to most people, maybe used for, I don't know, whatever, local production. Then it starts laying table eggs, or eggs that can be processed into liquid, frozen eggs. And then you have the end of life. And most of the time, what happens is in countries where forced molting by feed withdrawal is not illegal, farmers do tend to force molt these birds at end of their life, even in cages. So that's basically inducing molt in these birds by just like withdrawing the feed and shocking their systems, so that their entire ovaries kind of, I'm not an animal scientist, but basically it somehow helps rejuvenate the egg production, but it's really horrible. But you see huge amount of mortality, salmonella contamination, because suddenly starving these animals for days together. In a cage-free facility, and during this entire process in cages, when they're not maintained well, you can see mortality. And when you have mortality anywhere in between, all the feed that is given to the animal to bring it to start to lay goes waste, because the bird doesn't lay the eggs that it's needed to. But when you keep the animal in a cage-free facility and manage them really well, the mortality can actually be very low, and the peak production, that is the total number of eggs that the bird lays for the feed it consumes, can also be higher. And we've actually seen 95, 97% peak production. That's like about 1 egg a day in cage-free birds. And you're also able to extend their end of life without forced molting. So that means that the birds end up living for a couple of weeks more and continue to lay eggs. And so when you really draw out the total number of eggs that you get for the total number of feed that the bird consumes, you actually see that there isn't a huge difference. And in a well-managed farm, it could actually be lower. But I need to emphasize that this is all in a well-managed farm. Like if a cage-free farm is not well, as in cage-free by far is not cruelty-free. It requires a ton of management. If the feed is not managed well, then you have feed wastage, or if like there is not enough enrichment, and there's initially what starts off as feather pecking, which can lead to cannibalism. You could have floor eggs. There's just like a ton of issues that do come up in cage free, which has to be managed well. When managed well, you are able to actually get the same similar footprint to both.
Thank
And
you.
not to say about all the societal benefits that come in by just having a cage-free system, as in farmers go in and there's studies to show that farm workers are happier. There is generally typically a better on-farm management means lower use of antibiotics, less sick birds, all of that. So there's a ton of spillover effect of a high welfare farm.
Great, thank you. The next question I see is many NGOs around the world are operating on a very similar corporate engagement outreach model, which means getting new commitments and pushing for implementation, which seems different than the approach your NGOs are taking. Would you say that such approach NGOs generally take is somehow losing its effectiveness or impact?
Yeah, appreciate the question. And what I would say is that when we're trying to improve the lives of animals, there are so many different arguments of why to do it and so many different ways to doing it that I don't criticize when folks are trying different things. And when it comes to public campaigns against companies, yeah, I got to say, public campaigns do shine a light that a company is out of touch with ordinary consumer sentiment. And that is just true. And so what I would say is that, listen, what I'm doing at the accountability board, because at least for me, what I believe it's the most effective approach for what at least I bring to the table for animals. And I hope others are effective accomplishing very similar things. When it comes to, I see Tracy's question, and I'm happy to pass it on to Jayasimha to get his thoughts. Tracy, first of all, thank you for your work with rescue groups and finding homes for spent hens. That's just really tremendous of you to do. Tracy asked a question saying that there's, spent hens from cage systems are sometimes more physically robust on the whole. What I would, and I'm sure Tracy knows this, is that egg-laying hens can live for more than a decade. I've been to farm sanctuaries in different parts of the United States visiting them, and I meet a chicken, and they're like, oh yeah, this chicken is 8 years old. This chicken is 9 years old. When a chicken is quote unquote spent in the egg industry, they're often 1.5 years old. So it makes sense that they still have a lot of vitality left. It's just they don't produce as many eggs that the egg industry would want, which is why they're quote unquote spent. So that's why chickens from cage or cage-free operations can certainly have a robust health outcome once they're out of those situations and into sanctuaries. But at the same time, you know what? Chickens, in a normal sanctuary environment can live a very, very long life. And for those who haven't ever met a chicken, I highly recommend going to a sanctuary near you and meeting a chicken, because you're going to find that they have their own personalities, their own likes and dislikes. Some like to get cuddled, some like to get pet, others a little more bashful, just like our dogs and cats at home.
Great. There is another question for Jaya. For rapidly developing economies that have food security as a top priority, what would be the best ask to propose a change of the current mode of production? Is it animal suffering, or is it public health, or the risk of zoonotic disease danger?
I think, thanks, Peter, for the question. And obviously, Peter has a deep understanding of China and how things work there. I can definitely answer with few countries where I do have experience, and that would be Indonesia, Philippines, and India. All three countries which are in a different phase of their food insect security as an issue. India, for example, has more number of people who are food insecure than all of sub-Saharan Africa put together, while it also has an obesity as a epidemic proportion there. I guess the ask has always been, and which I think the governments do get, is are we able to, one, if it's possible to actually skip a generation and start looking at alt protein. And I guess like that's a huge ask for sure, in the sense like where in countries where you are able to skip, and then public policy and the investment can be done for that, that's a good thing. The second obviously issue is like if there's a bunch of climate change adaptation money coming into this country, and I guess one of the big scare there is these climate change adaptation keep like push these animals indoor more. Like for example, in India, it's really common for these methane digesters, like small scale methane digesters to be set up. And for that, you need to be able to capture the dung. And for that, the animals who were typically in pastures were now being brought in. And I think like that's definitely a concern, where you can have livestock related food security interventions, but then that food security intervention is kind of tied into a climate change fund or something like that. And that can actually have negative impact on the life of animals and bringing in the pastorals in. But I think the third and the most important thing is there is a whole body of science to actually show that factory farming of animals actually increases issues with relation to food security. And what we really need is that equitable consumption, where people who live even in countries like India, where the per capita consumption of eggs in Delhi, Bombay goes up to 300, 330, and drop down to like 8 and 12 in central India, where there is stunting as an issue. So I think there isn't one single ask, but I do think that the ask is for that equitable food consumption matrix to come into public policy play. So so I guess to answer your question straight, I think it's a bit of animal suffering, it's a bit of public health, it's a bit of zoonotic disease. But I think it's a large question really is that the current model of providing livestock as a pro-poor livestock public policy, is that actually even effective? And a lot of the factory farming funding comes to just increase that production. So I guess a relook into the entire food system is what's really required. And yeah, but I'm obviously happy to chat about this more often.
Thank you. And it's we have about 5 to 7 minutes left. So if you have any final thoughts, we would love to hear them. And also, I had one general question. What's some advice you would give to law students who would want to get engaged with your type of work and to make that impact for egg-laying hens and for farm animal welfare in general?
First of all, Nirva, thank you so much for having me, and Jayasimha, old pal. It's good to see you. Good to see you. Congratulations on the tremendous work that you and your team have been doing. What I would say is that it is so critical, and I'm talking to folks who are in the United States. I know people globally are tuning in, so I'm just going to focus on folks in the United States for this second. Everybody can do this. Literally everyone watching can do this in the United States. Please get involved with your local Congress member and your senator. And here's why. We talked a little bit about the EATS Act, which is the most dangerous piece of legislation ever introduced for farm animals in US history. It would wipe out farm animal laws across the country and prevent any new meaningful farm animal laws from ever passing in the United States. We need to galvanize Congress members and senators to oppose this. And I can tell you who is doing this on the other side. Big industrial pork producers are meeting with their Congress members and senators. They tweet about it all the time. They show photos of them standing hand in hand with their senators and Congress members. No matter who you are represented by a Congress member and 2 senators. And so what I would ask everybody to do is to reach out to their office. You can do this. Anyone can do this, and ask for a meeting. And oftentimes as long as you're a constituent, you are often given a meeting. And we all probably have made phone calls to Congress member offices and Senate offices when you get an action alert from a group that we're supportive of, and that's great. But that is small compared to reaching out to the office directly saying, hey, I'm a constituent of Congress member so-and-so. I'd like to have a meeting with the ag staff member about concerns related to the EATS Act. Most likely, I think you probably will get a meeting. That's my guess, is you will get a meeting. And that goes a long way. I say that means more than 100 phone calls coming in. Sometimes it means more than hundreds of phone calls coming in because they actually meet a constituent who is thoughtful, who's reasonable, who's caring, and cared enough to ask for a meeting. That is something that I think every student can do, every law student can do. And for you to say, listen, I'm a law student as well, it shows that your future is in the law. And that's why you care so much about stopping this potential law that could overdo so much progress our country has made. So that is something everyone can do. And I hope everyone does do that. I know I've done it for myself. And I just can't thank everybody enough for tuning in today and for caring about animals. We need you. We need the next generations of Jayasimhas and Nirvas of the world. I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody here can accomplish.
Thanks so much, Josh. And quickly, Nirva, there are two questions which I want to answer and then cut in. I think Kristen asked a question if there's a clear line between what is industrial animal and non-industrial. I think that's also good to realize that cage-free farms are also industrial in scale. So a lot of the other, like it does deal with some issues on animal welfare and with farmer welfare, so on and so forth. But the broader issues of intensive animal agriculture does exist on both caged as well as cage-free farms. We're able to bring in some safeguards, but it's hard to say that, well, because a farm is cage-free, it kind of is immune from all other issues like manure and downstream impact, a lot of those issues. So, but I think in the areas that we do operate, we have a very clear distinction on pastoral backyard smallholders versus farms that supply to commercial. So, and what ends up happening is one has a supply chain that's more rural and local, other that kind of feeds into urban, peri-urban areas in the region. So the distinction is pretty clear. And again, a lot of times people confuse smallholders backyard to mean high welfare. It does not mean that. Scale is a good thing. You're able to get like veterinarians and antibiotics and painkillers in. When you don't have that scale, it can be horrible. So I think there's a mix and match of all of that. With the World Organization for Animal Health, formerly OIE, we've kind of found it to be a bit of a waste of time engaging with them because they do have a pretty decent terrestrial animal code. In the countries that we operate, those codes are not worth the paper they're printed on. Like nobody really implements them, like the transport code and the slaughter code and stuff like that. I know that there are groups that dedicate on getting the OIE's laying in chapter. They might be worth on trade and other issues, but on the ground implementation of these OIE chapters are a bit suspect. And to kind of wrap up on the thing on law, students, I guess, like to look beyond public policy and legislative work. I think like it's pretty good, at least in India and other places when you do law, is to say, can I use a writ? Can I use a public interpretation? Can I pass a law? Is there a work within public policy? As Josh rightly said, if we really want to get these animals out of cages and change the food system, we got to be working with these mega corporations who actually control the food system. And hence, looking beyond that to look at how corporate structures work, family-owned companies, how companies in Asia work, and trying to implement some of the great work Josh is doing in other parts of the world would be a great way to help animals overall. But thank you so much for having me here.
Great, thank you. And I just saw the question. It's the EATS Act. Someone was asking what was the ag-related legislation that Josh referred to. It's called the EATS Act, EATS. I just want to thank you both so much for being here. I know, Jaya, it's past midnight right now in Singapore, so we express so much gratitude for both of you. Josh, thank you so much for being here today. I also want to thank the Animal Law Society here at the student group here at Harvard Law School that is our co-sponsor. And I want to thank Kelly Reddy, who's our program administrator, who organized the links and getting us all here together. I want to thank Sarah Pickering, our communications director, who did a tremendous job as well. It takes a lot to put these things together. I also want to thank Professor Kristen Stilt and to all of the students and everybody who participated. We really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
And I think we have 5 minutes if people want. I think we're done now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nirva.
Jay, go to bed.